I need to make love, don't move. The giant widowed to the lonely rancher, but he did next shock. The morning sun rose slowly over the vast fields surrounding the lonely ranch. The sky was painted with soft orange and pink hues, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the few scattered trees. The ranch itself was quiet, almost untouched by time, with the wooden fences standing firm and the barn showing signs of careful upkeep. The rancher, a man who had lived alone for many years, moved about his morning routine with calm precision. He was a tall, sturdy man with sun-kissed skin from years under the sun, hands rough but capable, and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of solitude. His life was simple, built on routine, hard work, and a steady connection with the land he tended. This morning, however, something felt different. There was a faint sound, almost too soft to notice at first, like the shuffle of heavy footsteps approaching from the long dirt road that led to the ranch. The rancher paused, his instincts alert. He had seen travelers, salesmen, and even wandering strangers before, but there was something unusual in the rhythm of the steps. It was steady, determined, almost deliberate. Curiosity mixed with caution as he walked toward the edge of the field where the road curved near the fence. That was when he saw her. She was enormous in height, taller than most people he had ever met, and carried herself with a strong, commanding presence, yet there was something fragile in her movements, a softness in the way she adjusted her coat and looked around nervously. The woman, who would later reveal herself as a widow, had hair the color of dark chestnuts and eyes that seemed to hold deep sadness. Her clothes were practical but showed signs of hurried preparation, like she had left in a rush.
The rancher's first thought was caution. People didn't simply arrive at his isolated home without a reason.
Desk. He approached her slowly, his boots crunching against the gravel. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Can I help you?" The woman looked up at him, and for a moment the size difference between them seemed almost comical. She had always been considered a giant in her town, and seeing her face framed by the rising sun, he could tell she had experienced hardship. Her eyes, however, were filled with an intensity that made him take a step back. I need help," she said softly, almost whispering. Her voice carried a mix of vulnerability and urgency. The rancher studied her carefully. "What kind of help?" he asked. He wasn't the type to invite strangers in without knowing their intentions, yet something about her demeanor sparked a deep sense of empathy.
She hesitated, biting her lower lip as if gathering courage.
Breaths.
I
have nowhere else to go," she said. Her voice trembled slightly, and he could see the exhaustion in her posture. She carried a small, worn bag that looked like it had been packed quickly, almost as if she had fled from something or someone. The rancher nodded slowly. He had lived a life of solitude, but he wasn't heartless. He gestured toward the barn and the small guest cabin near the edge of the property. Breaths.
You can stay in the cabin. It's small, but it's safe.
You'll need to help with chores if you want to stay. I don't run a free hotel.
She looked relieved, a small smile appearing despite her evident grief. "Thank you," she said. I promise I can be useful. Bust. I'm strong. I can work hard. I can't be alone right now. Breaths. Over the next few hours, she moved around the ranch with surprising skill. She lifted hay bales, fed the animals, and helped repair a broken section of the fence. Her strength was remarkable, and the rancher noticed that even though she seemed physically capable, her movements were careful, almost cautious, as if she were protecting herself from some unseen danger. But the day passed, They worked in silence at first, exchanging only the minimal words needed to coordinate tasks. The rancher watched her closely. There was a quiet intensity in the way she moved, a purposefulness that was almost magnetic. He had lived alone for so long that the sound of another person's presence, even one who was strong and imposing, felt strange.
There was a tension in the air, not unpleasant, but unfamiliar, like the calm before a storm. By the afternoon, they took a break near the edge of the pond that reflected the sky like a mirror. She sat on a rock, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "I used to live near a place like this," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Open fields, quiet skies. I miss it." Her eyes were distant, as if seeing something no one else could. The rancher nodded, not interrupting. He understood solitude. He respected it. "It's peaceful here," he said finally. "Not much happens, but it's honest work, and the land takes care of you if you take care of it." She looked at him, her gaze lingering longer than expected. "I envy that," she admitted. "I've been through a lot. It's been hard to find a place where I belong." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken words. She seemed to be weighing whether to reveal more about herself, about the pain she carried. Finally, she sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. "I lost someone," she said softly. "Someone very close. Breaths. And now I'm trying to find a way to keep going without feeling so empty." The rancher's heart tightened. Loss was something he understood all too well. Pain. Life on the ranch had taught him that pain didn't go away. You carried it, shaped it, and sometimes it shaped you in return. He didn't offer empty comfort. Instead, he nodded slowly, silently acknowledging her grief without pushing her to explain further. Painting the sky in shades of deep orange and purple, they returned to the cabin. She prepared a small meal using supplies she had brought, and they ate together in quiet companionship. The rancher noticed small details. The way her hands trembled slightly when she reached for the knife. The way her eyes softened when she smiled at something simple. He felt a strange sense of protectiveness, a need to ensure she was safe in a world that had clearly been unkind. That night, as the wind whispered through the trees, the rancher lay awake in his room, thinking about the day's events. The widow was an enigma, a puzzle that he couldn't quite solve. She was bold in some ways, yet fragile in others. There was a tension between them, subtle but undeniable, that made him feel both cautious and intrigued. He wondered about her past, the circumstances that had brought her to his doorstep, and the strength it must have taken to leave everything behind. He realized that despite her imposing appearance, she was deeply human, vulnerable, longing for connection, and searching for a place where she could belong. Meanwhile, the widow lay in the guest cabin, staring at the ceiling. The rancher had not tried to impose himself, had not questioned her too closely, and that restraint had touched her. For the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope that perhaps there was a place in the world where she could be safe and accepted. The night stretched on, quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves and distant animal calls. Both of them, in their separate rooms, felt the strange comfort of being near someone else without the need for words. The widow's presence had disrupted the rancher's routine, but in a way that was not threatening. Rather, it felt like the beginning of something uncertain but meaningful. The next morning promised new challenges and new discoveries. The widow's sudden arrival had already stirred emotions, thoughts, and questions neither of them expected. The rancher knew that keeping his life as it had been might no longer be possible. He sensed that her presence would change things, perhaps in ways that were subtle at first, but eventually profound. And as she emerged from the cabin, stretching and preparing for another day of work, the rancher watched her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. The days ahead would be unlike any he had experienced before. She was not just a visitor. She was a force of change, a puzzle wrapped in grief and strength, and he wasn't sure whether he was ready for what she might bring into his life. Breath. Yet, despite the uncertainty, there was a quiet acknowledgement between them, a recognition that life had delivered them into each other's path, for reasons neither could yet fully understand. The rancher returned to his chores with a steady heart, knowing that the calm of the ranch was no longer the same. But somewhere in the back of his mind, he wondered what the widow might reveal next, and how that revelation might challenge everything he thought he knew about solitude, human connection, and the unexpected twists of life. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of freshly turned soil and hay. The rancher moved through his usual routine, feeding the animals and checking fences. But there was a new awareness in his steps. The widow was awake and active already, humming softly as she tended to the chickens near the barn. Her presence had settled into the rhythm of the ranch, yet it still brought a sense of unpredictability he couldn't ignore. Brace. As he worked, he noticed the way she carried herself, strong, yet careful. She lifted heavy sacks of feed with ease, yet paused frequently, her eyes scanning the surroundings as if expecting trouble. There was an intensity about her, a quiet determination, but also a vulnerability that tugged at something deep inside him. The rancher couldn't help but watch, realizing how rare it was for him to feel curiosity mixed with concern. By mid-morning, they found themselves side by side repairing a section of fence that had weakened over the winter. The widow's hands moved with surprising precision, and her focus was absolute. She worked silently at first, and the rancher respected the quiet. Yet, as the sun climbed higher, she spoke, her voice breaking the stillness. "You work very hard," she said, glancing at him. "I can see why this place is so well kept."
You take pride in it. The rancher shrugged, not wanting to reveal too much.
"It's all I know. Takes care of me, and I take care of it." Simple enough. She smiled faintly, but there was a flicker of sadness behind her eyes. "I admire that. Most people just take and leave. You make things last."
He nodded, unsure how to respond.
The compliment felt genuine, but there was a weight to it that made him uneasy.
Her gaze lingered, and he felt a strange mix of caution and intrigue.
There was something about her that demanded attention, even though he knew he shouldn't allow himself to be drawn in so quickly. The day passed with more chores and conversations that skirted around personal details. She spoke carefully, revealing fragments of her life without giving too much away. She had lived in a town not far from the ranch, a place she had left behind after losing her husband. Her loss was still raw, and it shaped everything she did. The rancher listened quietly, sensing her grief without needing to ask too many questions. He had seen sorrow before, and he knew it was not something to be rushed or fixed with words. As afternoon fell, the sun casting long shadows across the fields, the widow paused near the pond, watching the water ripple in the breeze. "Brit," she spoke softly, almost to herself, but loud enough for him to hear. "I've never met anyone who just lets you be, and doesn't judge or push," she said. Her eyes were distant, reflecting more than just the sunlight. "Most people expect too much, too soon. You don't." The rancher didn't answer immediately. He kept working on a fence post, pretending to adjust the wood, but listening intently. Her words carried an honesty that surprised him, and he realized he was starting to understand her in a way that went beyond appearances.
She was bold, but also fragile. She had walls built high around her heart, yet she was reaching for something human, something real. Later that evening, after the chores were done and the animals settled, the widow joined him near the barn, carrying a small basket of vegetables she had picked. She moved closer, her tall frame bending slightly as she set the basket down. The rancher noticed how she looked at him, not with demand, but with an intensity that made the air between them charged. I don't usually do this, she said quietly, her voice shaking slightly. But I feel lonely. I haven't had anyone to talk to, really. And she paused, taking a deep breath. I feel drawn to you. Burse. I need something.
The rancher froze. Her words were direct, unfiltered, and they carried a weight he hadn't expected.
He understood loneliness, of course, but there was a line she was approaching that he wasn't ready to cross. He looked at her carefully, trying to measure the right response. You need? He asked cautiously, keeping his tone calm. I'm not sure I understand. She stepped closer, her presence overwhelming but not threatening. I need someone to care. Someone to connect with. I've been alone for so long. And
I'm tired of feeling invisible. Her voice trembled with emotion, and for a moment he saw the raw human need beneath her boldness.
He took a deep breath, steadying himself. He had to respond carefully, or risk saying something he might regret. I understand needing connection, he said slowly, but it has to be in the right way. Rushing doesn't help anyone, especially when there's so much pain to work through. She looked at him, shock and vulnerability flickering across her face. No one had spoken to her like that before. No one had acknowledged her feelings while also setting a boundary. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, realizing he wasn't reacting the way she expected. For the next few hours, they sat near the barn, talking about lighter things. She asked about the ranch, the animals, and his life in general. He shared small stories of childhood memories, of lessons learned from hard work and isolation. They laughed quietly at times, the tension easing slightly. Yet beneath it all was a current of emotional charge, unspoken words, desires, and fears that neither fully expressed. As night fell, the widow prepared a simple meal in the cabin, and the rancher joined her reluctantly. The flickering lantern light cast long shadows across the wooden walls, and there was a closeness in the room that was both comforting and dangerous. She tried to speak again, tentatively, about her need for companionship, but he gently guided the conversation elsewhere. He didn't reject her outright. He simply reminded her that some bonds took time to form, that rushing could lead to regret. But she listened, slowly absorbing his words. There was frustration in her eyes, but also a growing respect. He was different from anyone she had met. Firm, yet compassionate. Cautious, yet willing to engage. For the first time in months, she felt that her feelings were being acknowledged without being exploited or dismissed. The night was long, filled with small sounds, the wind rustling the trees, the distant calls of owls, the occasional scurry of animals. Sleep did not come easily for either of them. The widow lay in the guest cabin, reflecting on the day's events, her mind racing with thoughts of connection, longing, and the strange hope that had begun to bloom inside her. The rancher lay awake in his own room, thinking about boundaries, loneliness, and the unexpected stirrings that her presence had awakened in him. Over the next few days, the widow's presence became more familiar, yet no less powerful. Barash. She worked hard, helped with chores, and slowly became part of the daily rhythm of the ranch.
Yet there was always a tension beneath the surface, a delicate balance between her bold desire for closeness and his cautious restraint. But each glance, each word, carried a weight that neither could ignore. She would sometimes linger near him as he worked, watching silently, and he noticed the intensity in her gaze. It was not just attraction. There was grief, longing, and the desperate need to feel alive again. He found himself thinking about her at unexpected moments, aware of a growing emotional pull that he had not anticipated. One afternoon, while they were mending a section of the barn roof, she suddenly spoke, her voice trembling but firm. "I need you to know. I'm not just here to work or stay. I want more. I want separation. And I can't keep pretending I don't. Separation." The rancher froze, balancing a wooden plank in his hands. The word struck him with surprising force. He realized that this was the moment where everything could change. His mind raced. He could give in, reject her, or find a way to respond that honored both their feelings and the reality of the situation. He chose the hardest path. He put down the plank carefully and looked at her with steady eyes. "I hear you," he said softly.
I understand what you're feeling, but I'm not going to respond the way you expect.
I respect you too much to let desire guide us blindly. We have to find another way to connect. A way that doesn't hurt either of us.
Rest. She blinked, surprised. His response was calm, firm, and shocking. No one had ever spoken to her like this. Her boldness had met an equal measure of thoughtfulness and restraint. She looked at him, conflicted, her emotions swirling. Anger, frustration, longing, and something else. Something softer. Almost admiration. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the fields in gold and violet, they both sat outside the cabin, quietly listening to the sounds of the ranch. The widow reflected on the day, realizing that her boldness had been tempered not by rejection, but by understanding. The rancher reflected on his own feelings, acknowledging the unexpected stirrings of curiosity and empathy she had awakened in him. And so the days passed, each one deepening the tension and connection between them. The widow's boldness remained, but it was tempered by growing respect. The rancher's caution remained, but it was softened by curiosity and understanding. The balance was delicate, yet it held, creating a foundation for something neither of them could yet fully name. But both felt, deeply. The next morning dawned, with a quiet hush over the ranch. The sunlight stretched lazily across the fields, highlighting the worn paths and golden hay bales stacked neatly near the barn. The widow had already begun her morning chores, moving with her usual efficiency, though there was a tension in her movements that hadn't been there before. The rancher watched her from a distance, noticing that today she seemed different, not just focused, but restless, as if something inside her had shifted overnight. He moved about his own tasks, repairing a fence post that had come loose in the night. His mind kept wandering back to the previous day's conversation. The way she had spoken, so direct about her desire for connection, had struck him deeply. It was rare to encounter someone so bold yet so painfully vulnerable. He respected her courage, yet he also knew that boundaries were essential. Their interactions had always been measured, balanced, but today he sensed that she might challenge that balance. By mid-morning, she approached him with a basket of apples she had picked from the small orchard. Her eyes met his with a piercing intensity, and for a moment, the usual ease of their routine seemed suspended. She took a deep breath, and her voice, usually calm and measured, quivered slightly. I need to tell you something," she said, placing the basket carefully on a wooden crate beside them. The rancher looked at her calmly, waiting. There was a quiet patience in his gaze, an unspoken invitation for her to speak her mind. She hesitated, then stepped closer, her towering frame casting a shadow over him.
I can't keep pretending anymore, she said. I need you.
I need someone to care for me, to hold me, to make me feel alive again. I can't stop thinking about you. He froze, his hands gripping the wood he had been holding. Her words were shocking in their directness. The intensity of her desire, combined with the raw honesty of her grief, created a swirl of emotions he had not anticipated. He understood loneliness. He had lived with it for years. But the way she expressed it was powerful, almost overwhelming. The widow moved closer still, her eyes searching his face for a response. I can't hide it anymore. I need closeness. I need warmth. I need someone who sees me, truly sees me. And I see you, she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of her emotions. The rancher took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. He realized that this moment was pivotal. His response could either satisfy her longing or protect them both from making a decision they might regret. He chose the latter. I hear you, he said softly, placing a hand on the crate to steady himself. I understand your feelings, but giving in to desire alone isn't the answer. I won't deny your pain, but I also won't let it guide us into something that might hurt both of us. Her expression changed in an instant. Shock, confusion, frustration, and something else. Almost awe flickered across her face. No one had ever responded to her so calmly, so wisely. She had expected either acceptance or rejection, but not this measured understanding that neither shamed nor encouraged her. You're not going to? She asked, her voice barely audible. You're not going to push me away, and you're not going to give in either? No, I won't. There are ways to connect that don't hurt anyone. Ways to feel close without losing ourselves or making decisions we might regret later.
I care about you, but we need to take the right path. The widow sat down on the crate, staring at the apples in her lap.
For a moment, she seemed lost in thought, her mind racing. The intensity of her desire collided with the reality of his restraint, creating a swirl of conflicting emotions. Desk. She had come to the ranch seeking comfort, perhaps even release from her grief. And yet he had shown her a new kind of strength, a calm that demanded respect. Why are you different? She asked finally, her voice tinged with curiosity and wonder. Why do you care without losing yourself? The rancher looked at her with steady eyes. Because I've learned that desire without understanding is dangerous. Connection without respect is fragile. I won't let pain or longing dictate what we do. I want to understand you, and I want you to understand yourself too before anything else happens. She listened, slowly absorbing his words. The raw intensity of her emotions began to shift into reflection. She realized that her boldness, her desperation had been fueled by grief, by months of loneliness, by the fear of being invisible. His response, firm yet compassionate, made her see that there were other ways to find closeness, ways that honored both their humanity. As the day passed, they continued their work together, but a new dynamic had emerged. The widow moved with a quieter energy, her boldness tempered by respect and curiosity. The rancher, in turn, remained watchful but more open, sensing that their bond was deepening in subtle ways. They spoke more openly now, sharing fragments of their past, their fears, and their hopes. Laughter occasionally punctuated the quiet of the ranch, a sound that had been absent for far too long. In the late afternoon, they sat near the pond, the water reflecting the soft glow of the sun. The widow watched the ripples, and then looked at him. "I've never met anyone like you," she said softly. "Someone who listens, who sees without judgment, who cares without being pushed." The rancher shrugged lightly. "I'm not perfect. I just know that life has a way of testing people. You have to make choices that honor yourself and others, or you'll regret them later." She nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. For the first time in months, she felt a spark of hope, not the fleeting excitement of desire, but a deeper sense of possibility. Breaths rasped through the fluids. She realized that her need for connection could be fulfilled in ways she hadn't imagined, through trust, understanding, and mutual respect. Birth. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, they shared a quiet meal in the cabin. The widow had prepared a simple stew, and they ate in companionable silence, each lost in thought. The air was charged with unspoken feelings, yet it was different now, calm, respectful, and full of potential. After dinner, the widow cleaned up while the rancher stepped outside to check the barn. The cool night air wrapped around him, and he reflected on the day's events. He realized that her boldness had revealed a deep vulnerability, and his restraint had created an opportunity for trust to grow. This was new territory for both of them, and he understood that the coming days would require patience, empathy, and careful guidance. Meanwhile, the widow sat by the cabin window, staring at the stars that began to twinkle in the clear night sky. But she felt a strange mix of emotions: longing, admiration, curiosity, and a sense of safety she hadn't felt in months. The rancher's response had been unexpected, but it had also opened a door she didn't know existed, the door to emotional connection without the pressure of immediate physical desire. Over the next few days, their relationship continued to evolve. She assisted with all the ranch chores, her strength and determination evident in every task. Yet she also began to open up emotionally, sharing memories of her late husband, her childhood, and the loneliness that had shaped her. The rancher listened patiently, offering support without judgment, sometimes sharing his own experiences to create balance and understanding.
One afternoon, while they were fixing a section of the barn roof together, she suddenly stopped and looked down at him.
"I've never been able to be this honest with anyone," she said softly, "and I don't know if I could have survived these past months without someone like you."
The rancher paused, hammer in hand, and looked at her steadily.
Breast. "I can't change the past," he said, "but we can make choices now that help us both. I'm here and I'm willing to see this through, but we must take care of each other and respect the pace we need." Her eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of relief. She realized that the connection she had been seeking was not about immediate satisfaction. It was about trust, understanding, and mutual respect.
But the first time she felt that her boldness could be tempered by wisdom and that strength could coexist with vulnerability. By the end of part 3, the dynamic between them had shifted profoundly.
The widow's shocking confession had met the rancher's measured response, creating a bond built not on impulsive desire, but on careful understanding. They were no longer simply two people coexisting on the ranch. They were beginning a journey of emotional connection, trust, and hope. Even as the night settled in, bringing quiet and stillness to the fields and barns, both of them lay awake in their separate spaces, reflecting on the day. The widow felt a flicker of hope and safety she had not experienced in a long time. The rancher felt a mix of curiosity, responsibility, and unexpected warmth towards someone who had entered his life so abruptly. Somewhere in the quiet of that night, both realized that the days ahead would test their patience, courage, and understanding. But they were ready to face those days together, step by careful step. The days at the ranch had taken on a rhythm that was both familiar and new. The widow had become part of the daily routine, yet her presence continued to stir emotions the rancher had not felt in years. He moved through his chores with quiet efficiency, but now there was a heightened awareness in every step, the soft hum of her voice as she worked, The steady strength in her movements and the occasional glance in his direction made the air feel different, charged with a connection that neither of them fully understood yet. For the widow, each day brought a mixture of comfort and uncertainty. She was growing stronger emotionally, learning to trust again, yet the ache of loneliness remained, a quiet undercurrent in her thoughts. Her grief had not banished, it never would, but the rancher's measured patience and respect offered her a new kind of support. She could exist as herself without feeling the pressure to perform, to beg, or to demand affection. It was a revelation she had never known before. One morning, as the sun rose over the fields, painting them with soft golden light, she approached him with a basket of freshly picked herbs. She moved with her usual ease, but today there was a subtle nervousness in the way she carried herself. The rancher looked up from his work, hammer in hand, and met her gaze. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had grown over the past days.
"I've been thinking,"
she said quietly, placing the basket on the wooden table near the barn. "About everything. About how I've lived, how I've reacted to loss, and about you." Breaths. Her eyes searched his, seeking some kind of reassurance.
"You've shown me something I didn't know I could feel again. Safety."
Respect. Even hope. Grasp.
The rancher nodded slowly. Hope is a fragile thing, he said.
It grows when it's nurtured carefully. It can wither quickly if not treated with care. Narration. She smiled faintly. A mixture of gratitude and relief. Then, I want to nurture it.
I want to try, even if it's scary. Over the next several days, their connection deepened, but always in a way that respected boundaries and cultivated trust.
They shared meals, stories, and quiet moments under the vast sky. Sometimes they would sit on the porch of the cabin in the evening, watching the stars appear one by one, speaking softly about memories, fears, and small dreams. The widow spoke about her life before tragedy, the laughter of family gatherings, the joy of simple pleasures, and the comfort of human connection. The rancher shared his experiences growing up in isolation, learning from the land and finding peace in routine and hard work. One afternoon, a storm rolled over the field, sending dark clouds rushing across the sky and sudden gusts of wind that rattled the barn doors. The widow was inside the cabin securing supplies when the rancher came to check on her. Rain began to fall heavily, and the sound of it pounding the roof created a sense of intimacy and urgency.
You don't have to do everything alone,
he said, his voice steady, offering her support as she adjusted a loose shutter. She looked at him, eyes wide, and for a moment the usual boldness returned, mingled with vulnerability. I sometimes forget that it's okay to accept help, she admitted. I've spent so long surviving on my own, I didn't know how to lean on someone else. It's not a weakness. Sharing the load is part of living, not just surviving. The rain poured on, and they moved together to secure the cabin's windows. The closeness of the moment, combined with the intensity of the storm, created an atmosphere that was electric, yet safe. For the first time, the widow felt fully seen, not as a grieving woman seeking solace, not as someone bold and demanding, but simply as herself. The rancher's calm presence offered a space where she could exist without pretense or fear. As the storm passed, leaving a clean, fresh scent in the air, they stepped outside together. The sky was a brilliant mix of sunlight and lingering clouds, the fields shimmering with raindrops. A quiet satisfaction settled over both of them. The widow felt lighter, as if the storm had washed away not just dust and dirt, but layers of grief and fear she had carried for months. The rancher felt a growing warmth inside him, a realization that this connection, careful, slow, and genuine, was something rare and worth protecting. Days turned into weeks, and the widow continued to find her place on the ranch, helping with chores and gradually opening her heart. The rancher observed her growth with a mixture of admiration and quiet pride.
She was learning to trust again, to allow someone into her life without fear, and to embrace her own strength alongside her vulnerability.
He, in turn, was learning to soften, to recognize that human connection, when nurtured carefully, was a source of strength, not distraction. One evening, after a long day of tending the fields, they sat together on the porch steps, sharing a simple meal of bread, cheese, and fresh fruit. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the quiet understanding that had grown over time. The widow spoke softly, reflecting on her journey. "I never thought I could feel like this again," she said. "Alive, hopeful, like I belong somewhere."
I thought loss would define me forever. The rancher looked at her, his eyes calm and steady.
"Loss changes us," he said. "But it doesn't have to define us. We can carry it, honor it, and still create a life that matters. That's what we're doing here, every day, Bration." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes, not tears of sorrow, but of relief and gratitude. She realized that the connection she had sought so desperately was not about immediate fulfillment, but about a slow, steady growth of trust and understanding. She felt safe, seen, and valued, and that feeling was more powerful than anything she had expected when she first arrived at the ranch.
In the days that followed, small moments continued to strengthen their bond.
They worked together in the fields, repaired fences, and tended to animals. They shared quiet conversations under the vast sky, laughed at small mistakes, and celebrated small victories. Each moment reinforced the growing respect, trust, and affection between them. The widow also began to open up about her past more fully, sharing stories of her late husband, her childhood, and her dreams for the future. The rancher listened, offering insights and empathy without judgment. In turn, he shared his own past, revealing moments of loneliness, struggles with isolation, and lessons learned from living close to the land. Their conversations were honest, deep, and meaningful, creating a foundation of emotional intimacy that neither had experienced before. One afternoon, while repairing a section of the barn roof, the widow paused and looked down at the rancher. "I've never felt this understood before," she said.
Not just seen, but really understood.
You make me feel like I can be myself, without fear or shame." The rancher smiled gently. "That's all anyone can hope for," he said. "To be seen, understood, and respected. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, it matters." That evening, as the sun set behind the distant hills, they sat together on the porch, sharing a quiet peace that felt like home. The widow reflected on how far she had come, from desperation and grief to trust, hope, and connection. The rancher reflected on the unexpected joy of companionship and the fulfillment of helping someone heal. Together they had created a space where both could grow, feel safe, and experience the quiet strength of human connection. As the night deepened, they retired to their separate spaces, each carrying the warmth of the day and the bond they had nurtured. The widow felt a sense of belonging she had not known in years, a reassurance that she was no longer alone. The rancher felt a sense of calm satisfaction knowing that he had met her boldness with patience and respect, creating something lasting and meaningful. Over time, the ranch became more than a place of work. It became a home filled with understanding, trust, and quiet joy. The widow and the rancher continued their daily routines, but now each task was imbued with shared purpose and mutual respect. They celebrated small victories together, supported each other through moments of doubt, and found comfort in each other's presence. One morning, as the first light of dawn touched the fields, the widow stood near the barn, looking out at the land she had come to love. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the rancher, but for the journey that had brought her here. Desperation. And now she stood with grief, boldness, and desperation. And now she stood with hope, trust, and a sense of belonging. The rancher joined her quietly, placing a hand on the fence beside hers.
They watched the sunrise together. The fields bathed in golden light, the animals moving peacefully, and the world feeling calm and alive.
In that moment, there was no need for words, just a shared understanding, a bond forged through patience, respect, and the slow, steady growth of trust.
And so, life continued on the ranch, not perfect, but real, meaningful, and full of quiet joy.
The widow and the rancher had found something rare, a connection built on understanding, compassion, and respect. It was not the fiery passion of sudden desire, but a deeper, lasting bond that promised hope, companionship, and the possibility of a future together. They had both been changed by their meeting. She had found safety, trust, and hope. He had found empathy, companionship, and quiet joy. Together they had created a new rhythm, one that honored both their pasts and the possibilities of tomorrow. And as the sun climbed higher over the fields, they moved forward together, step by careful step, into a life that neither had expected, but both had come to cherish.